When video games first came out, it was revolutionary and breathtaking. We look at the first game from 1961 and see it as an outdated piece of machinery that was simplistic and boring. But it was because of that old Tennis for Two machine that the most fondest memories people have today, myself included, have been because of the development of the gaming industry. How even if the games that are successful at the moment may be garbage, it still has brought a massive amount of popularity to the community of people who play games, as well as bringing a community together generation after generation of both console and people. Today we're going to be having a look at how video games have changed our lives over time, as well as how they affect our lives for better or for worse. Let's start off with a semi-quick history lesson. I mean, I didn't take a college level history course in high school for no reason. Anyways, the US made some huge technological advances to beat the beast in the East, the USSR. As the Cold War came to an end, we saw a huge boost in entertainment. Movies were bigger than ever, and the 1980s gave birth to what we see as a modern video games. With video games being a new and rising form of entertainment, companies such as Apple and Commodore wanted to get involved. Both would release personal computers and would have teams develop computer games that would run on the systems. They would mostly be choose your own adventure text games, but personally, I love those games for how much can be done and the option to do what you want without it being a set path. Of course, with the nation that I'm in, there would obviously be some competition to rival home consoles and the PC. And that would be the rise of arcade machines, Pac-Man, Galaga, Dig Dug, Polybius, just to name a few. But I can assure you that you could think of many timeless arcade games that would take up as many quarters from kids and their friends as the machine could. Other games would be this new stunning work of art that changed the way those games look, such as Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, that seem to have used the same style of animation from animated movies at the time. As technology advanced, it mirrored how video games advanced. From video games based on movies to actual Hollywood animators trying their hand at this new medium. Not all were successful, as in December of 1982, Atari would release E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Some choose this point in time to be what caused the video game crash in 1983. This would lead to a 2-year period where video games were forgotten media, but then a Japanese company would come out with a creation that would bring life back into video games. And what company was that? Nintendo. When Nintendo released the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985 to America, it basically revived the whole video game scene. The launch of the NES would release titles such as Duck Hunt, Excite Bike, and Ice Climbers, but none of these would be as important and influential as when on October 18th of 1985, in New York City, Super Mario Bros. Would be released to America. This game set the bar for platformers at the time, and the amount of hidden warp pipes and secrets found weren't as popular as they are now. From that release, the video game industry was now booming, and home games from the time are now the most recognized and held as classics. Mega Man, Castlevania, Super Mario, Legend of Zelda, and Metroid are just a small amount of games from that time that are, well, timeless. From the amazing music of Mega Man and Castlevania to the exploration-driven gameplay of Metroid and Zelda, video games were now at their peak, and could only go up from where it is. Of course, at that time you still had competition with the PC and Atari games still coming out, but only one of the two would rise over the other in the era known by millennials as rad times, or as the Wikipedia article I'm getting most of this information from, the 90s. The time known as the 90s would be one of the most innovative time for video games due to how little time there was to hop from one new bit generation to a completely new one with a whole different set of controls now because of the environment these games placed you in. With the 8-bit era being improved upon with every massive launch title, it seemed that it couldn't get any better, but as if right on cue, Nintendo releases the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and Game Boy, which I would say was the first ever portable handheld console and paved the way to their newest system nowadays, the Nintendo Switch. But everything was different now. Instead of the 8-bit systems of the past, it is now the future, which means 16-bit graphics. Truly is a great time to be alive. The console had such a huge variety of games. There was Super Mario World, Super Metroid, Super Mario RPG, Super Castlevania, Super Ghosts and Ghouls, Super Mario Kart, Super Punch-Out, Mega Man X, Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, Yoshi's Island, Donkey Kong Country, Kirby Superstar, F-Zero, Earthbound, Final Fantasy, Earthworm Jim, and I would say one of the most important games at that time, as well as one of my personal favorites, Star Fox. Now let me explain. The Super Nintendo was a 16-bit console that mainly had 2D side-scrollers. Of course, games like Donkey Kong Country, F-Zero, and Super Mario Kart were all 3D looking, but I felt that Star Fox was a big push towards the 3D generation of games, with Star Fox looking like the ships and environment had depth to it, despite it being a bunch of pixels shaded and resourcefully placed to make it seem that way. This, I would say, paved the way to 32 and 64-bit era. But That was a card up Nintendo's sleeve when a rival sped into the video game scene and had a recognizable mascot by the name of Sonic the Hedgehog. Sega released the aptly named Sega Genesis and featured hits such as Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Sonic the Hedgehog 3, Sonic the Hedgehog 4, Sonic and Knuckles, and ToeJam and Earl. When the first Sonic game came out in 1991, it became so popular that it passed Mario's popularity and made Sega a target to Nintendo. These two companies were now at war to see which of the consoles was better, Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo. This would be the first ever console war documented due to computers now holding written information instead of books. This would be the time that Nintendo would use their trump card to destroy the opponent, but in November of 1994, Sega thought that this new console would beat out Nintendo and release the Sega Saturn. This would be one of the monumental failures Sega would make during these times. It was finally Nintendo's turn to unveil their new console to the population, and in September of 1996 they released the Nintendo 64. The new and improved gaming experience was 4 times better than the Super Nintendo, and it was where players could now play games in an open environment as their favorite characters in any way they liked instead of levels that were meant to be completed in a certain way. Mario 64, GoldenEye 64, Donkey Kong 64, Mario Kart 64, Banjo-Kazooie, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and Majora's Mask, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Star Fox 64, and Smash Brothers. This was arguably the golden era of games, and there was no doubt that Nintendo was back on top. But it seems that I've forgotten something that's very crucial to the video game retrospective, which is more like a timeline. I might have forgotten a company that deserves to be name dropped. That company would be Sony. Sony released the PlayStation in September of 1995 and would contain such hits as Metal Gear Solid, Crash Bandicoot, Resident Evil, and a bunch of Final Fantasy games. But there was another form of entertainment within the gaming industry, that was the PC mentioned earlier. It also helped make progress towards 3D games with titles such as Doom, Wolfenstein, Diablo, Half-Life, Quake, StarCraft, Fallout, Duke Nukem, System Shock, and many more. There was obviously more variety to choose of what to play when it comes to video game platforms in the 90s, and each with their own style of game. But one thing stayed the same throughout this generation and onwards. The game you play were no longer about saving the princess or beating the robot masters or some supernatural being. It was about these complex characters who had emotions and were trying to achieve this goal because someone or something depends on it. Of course, there were still games being made for fun, but video games were now a medium to project an idea or concept onto, instead of those ideas just being movies and literature. With there now being multiple competitors in the video game market now wanting to improve upon the previous version, there would be another company who was known for making the best softwares for common and business use, Microsoft. In 2001, they would release the Xbox to the world with hit games such as GTA San Andreas, Halo 1 and 2, Fable, Morrowind, and others. Halo Combat Evolved would become one of the most iconic games to come to this generation of consoles, as well as Microsoft's most recognizable characters, Master Chief. Although this would now make multiple companies in the race to be the ultimate video game hardware developer, which would lead to some companies now just throwing stuff into the public and hoping that it sticks. But during this time it wasn't as bad, which is why as competition, Sony released the PlayStation 2 and Nintendo released the GameCube. Both consoles would be praised as one of the best of all time. The games included for the PlayStation 2 were GTA 3, Vice City, San Andreas, Resident Evil 4, Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3, God of War 2, and Shadow of the Colossus. For the GameCube it had Mario Double Dash, Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, Pikmin, Metal Gear Solid, The Twin Snakes, Smash Bros. Melee, Luigi's Mansion, Paper Mario, Fire Emblem, and one of the top Mario games, Super Mario Sunshine. Most of these games were of course before my time. I'll play them later on in life, but I never got to experience them when they first released to the public. But that does lead to when I started growing up and becoming conscious of what video games are and how to play them. Then, another cluster of consoles in the late 2000s. In 2005, Microsoft would release the Xbox 360, and a year later, the Wii and PlayStation 3 would release. All of them were now starting to look better graphically, for a console that is, and I would say the best games came from this generation of consoles. To group them as a whole, you had Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, Guitar Hero 3, Halo 3, Mario Kart Wii, Gears of War, Silent Hill, Call of Duty Black Ops, Smash Bros. Brawl, Modern Warfare 1, 2, and 3, Skyrim, Batman Arkham City, and Asylum, Metal Gear Solid 4, Fallout 3, and New Vegas, Borderlands 1 and 2, the BioShock series, Uncharted, Dead Space, Left 4 Dead, Portal 1 and 2, Black Ops 2, Grand Theft Auto 4, Red Dead Redemption, The Last of Us, Grand Theft Auto 5, Halo Reach, and many more classic titles that we all grew up with, each of them having an impact on us as people and shaping the people who played them into who we are today. You can probably remember starting up one of these games and being sucked into a world like you never have before. With video games being the biggest entertainment platform, you don't get there without prices to pay. Recently, video games have been plagued by a morbid monster called microtransactions. microtransactions. Games are now expecting players to voluntarily give the developer their money just so they can have a few extra additions to their game, or have the advantage in certain situations. Some games, of course, like Overwatch and Minecraft and sadly Fortnite, use the microtransaction virus as a way to provide players with purely visual customizations and don't give an edge towards any of the gameplay. Of course, there are games like Red Dead Redemption 2 which took Rockstar and other teams years to make and perfect into what it is today. They hype up this online mode that players could enjoy the Old West with friends in this entirely realized and realistic environment, then are forced to ruin their own world with microtransactions for the simplest of weapons, as well as not releasing what was promised for buying the deluxe edition for the online mode. Or companies will flat out make the game unplayable unless some sort of microtransaction is bought, like with the games 2K20 and Fallout 74 having a huge emphasis on buying microtransactions to enhance the experience of the game. Some people have no problem with the pay-to-win experience, but frankly, I do. Now, I may be the most hypocritical man on earth due to me spending dubious amounts of money on games just to have an advantage or early start, but I grew up, and now I realize that this business practice is not healthy and could ruin games. Now I mainly stick to the same couple of games and maybe play an indie one every now and then. I'm more cautious of modern games due to how they have the possibility of microtransactions, or at least being overrun with them. That raises the question: have video games become stale now? The more recent generation of games have been oversaturated with remasters, and it's not uncommon to see a new remaster or a remake of a beloved game. Most notably Skyrim, which has special editions, legendary editions, and remasters. This has been memed within the community, and this practice can be good for older, more retro games, but for relatively recent games, seems like there isn't anything publishers won't do to sell something. It makes you wonder, are video games on the verge of another collapse? Financially, probably not. But from a hardcore perspective, it's easy to think that creativity is just an afterthought, with revenue being number one. With this though, we should recognize the smaller games that need the support of gamers to stay alive. Games like Don't Starve, Cuphead, Binding of Isaac, Hotline Miami, Inside, Super Meat Boy, Super Hot, Limbo, Fez, Hollow Knight, Stanley Parable, Shovel Knight, Rocket League, Katana Zero, Celeste, Undertale, A Hat in Time, Stardew Valley, A Night in the Woods, and more independent projects made by people with a little budget who have this creative idea for a game and just want to give it to the people. Sometimes it could be a critique of a video game genre, such as how Hotline Miami and Super Hot make fun of the action games for mindless violence because that's the type of game that they are, or games like Cuphead and Undertale, which want to bring back certain aspects of games and improve upon them. Undertale is praised for the game allowing the player to either kill everything and suffer the consequences of their actions, or attack nothing and get a really satisfying ending. You see, these games and their developers were just like us at one point in time. They loved the stories being told by these AAA companies and were inspired by them to make a game. You can call these games trash, and some of these are, yes, but the ones that actually have care and compassion for the gaming industry try their damnedest to make a decent game. If one player connects with, it meant the world to them. These people deserve all the support they can get while making these projects, and not the AAA companies who would be releasing the game in 2 months and expect people to pre-order so they have the money to work on the game. I'm not saying all AAA studios are money-hungry capitalists bent on ruining a player's experience by filling a game with viable in-game items. Some actually want to make a good game and release it to the public. Don't take this as hatred against these companies. You can like a game that I dislike and vice versa. That's how the world works. Just because someone else doesn't like a game you don't shouldn't dictate whether you play it or not, or even how much you enjoy it. Everyone at some point in time has been affected by a game in a positive way. Playing with friends, meeting new people halfway across the world, playing by yourself, or just having a great time doing whatever it is. Or even beating a game that took you forever to complete. It doesn't depend on the game that gave you these experiences. It's the actual experience and the fact that you are enjoying your time playing, if that makes any sense. Everyone remembers the first time they started a game and it just connected with them. It's an amazing feeling, but unfortunately everyone grows up, and with that comes more responsibilities and less time to play those games. But when you do return back to them, it sparks an emotional response after all these years. It's those events that make it seem like video games have a huge impact on us, who we are, and how we come together, and now we are truly a community of friends who all care for each other no matter what we say to each other over public chats or what video games we play. One of the biggest communications platforms, is a public chat meant to bring together communities of gamers, and is now one of the largest social gaming experiences, as well as multiple conventions bringing us together to see both big and small projects being made for our entertainment. For better or for worse, video games are now more popular than ever, with big celebrity collaborations. PewDiePie, for instance, got the world to experience his monumentous milestone of 100 million subscribers after all these years, and starting it off by playing a simple game with a reaction. Or Ninja, who has signed contracts that would rival a movie star and has appeared in the mainstream outside of just the gaming industry. Gaming is now more culturally relevant than ever, with the cultural golden age upon us. Regardless of how mainstream media portrays violence in video games can put you in a world like no other medium can. Instead of watching or reading a character experience the events, you are the character experiencing those events, and by that alone, they will always have a place in the entertainment industry, flaws and all.